Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Issues of Faith. We are talking with Dr. John Vile via Zoom. He's a political science professor at MTSU. He's just written this book, Prayer in American Public Life, an encyclopedia. And so we were talking about one aspect of this that I'm fascinated by, prayer in public schools. We've covered that. But this book's about public life, and you've researched it. What else kind of stands out to you as you wrote this book?
Well, again, prayer in schools is just such a minor part when you think about, our everyday experiences. It shows up in movies, it shows up in music, African American, there's sort of a whole genre of prayer there. There's a difference between spontaneous prayer, sort of like what I grew up with, and then more liturgical prayers, like you would find, among Episcopalians or Roman Catholics. I'm particularly interested in how many U.S. inaugural addresses, presidential inaugural addresses, mention prayer. And I'm also very interested in who is called on to pray in Congress. We previously mentioned that, the court has upheld hiring a chaplain. And one of the fascinating things is my book tries to trace, who was the first Jewish person who was asked to pray? Who was the first Hindu? Who was the first Native American religion? And it's almost become a way of when you give somebody a chance to pray, you're acknowledging that they are spiritual beings just like you are, even if you happen to disagree with them. One of my favorite stories is one that Abraham Lincoln used to tell. And apparently these Quaker women were talking to one another, and one of them says, well, I'm convinced that the South is going to win the war. And the other said, well, why is that? And she says, well, I understand that Jefferson Davis is a praying man. And the Quaker said, well, Abraham Lincoln is too. And she said, yes, but God's going to think he's joking. So Lincoln had a reputation as a younger man as being very skeptical of religion. It seems to be something that changed. But, some of the most, even though we're a secular society, some of the most important works in American politics, I would say probably one of the greatest is the second inaugural address, where, Lincoln says we both read the same, we believe in the same God, we read the same Bible, but God can't answer all our prayers because we're asking for different things. And, that kind of humility, I think, in approaching prayer is a pretty good approach to take. Something that a lot of people don't know is that when Dwight D. Eisenhower, the 50s are a particularly interesting time in U.S. history because, we came out of World War II and we go directly into the Cold War. And what do we have that the communists don't have? Well, they're godless atheists, and we have a secular society, but we permit free exercise. And so you see almost every president in this time period this is the time period during which we added "In God We Trust" to the coins. We added "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. And when President Eisenhower was inaugurated in 1952, he actually, before he started the speech, he said, I'd like to ask you to bow your heads, and I'm going to read a prayer that I wrote last night. And he did. And of course, Franklin D. Roosevelt had read a prayer on the day of the D-Day invasion.
That's all fascinating. I mean, that's all fascinating. And there's this anecdote that you have in there about Billy Graham. Billy Graham became the pastor to the presidents, essentially.
Yes.
But his first president was Harry Truman, and after that meeting...
He was a fellow Baptist, yes.
A fellow Baptist. But after that meeting, it almost ended, right? He almost wasn't going to meet with another president. What happened in that meeting with Harry Truman?
Well, and Truman later forgave Graham. Graham was relatively new at this. When he got out, the reporters asked him to reenact what had happened. And so he got down on his knees and sort of, repeated the whole conversation. Well, somebody who had, somebody in the know would have known that was inappropriate to, without the president's permission. Truman thought that Graham was grandstanding. I don't think he purposely was, although he was one who liked to emphasize how close he was to power. And he worked at cultivating presidents. And Truman was sort of a no-nonsense guy. He didn't. I think he was religious, but he didn't wear his religion on his sleeve, and he just felt like it had been sort of exploited. And again, later, he and Graham later met and sort of made up on it over it. But it's an interesting story for sure. And
I'm fascinated in your historical perspective. All right, you've seen where we've been with prayer in public life. It's kind of ebbed and flowed. And where do you think we're headed? Where do you think we're going in the next 20, 30 years?
We seem to be a more secular society than we were even 10 or 20 years ago. One of the things that I would like to mention is, Ukraine brings up an interesting situation. We, Christians, and I guess others are told to pray for those in authority. How do we pray? And particularly, do we pray? Somebody asked me, and my response is, well, I pray for the people in Ukraine who I think are, I think what's happening to them is awful. But I also pray for the Russian soldiers who may or may not have any idea why they're there or what, may not have much choice in the matter. And one of the most engaging essays I found is an essay by Mark Twain, in which it's sort of a short story, and he tells about this preacher who's praying that God will slay all their enemies and that his country will win. And the guy comes in and he says, "Do you know what you're praying for? You're praying that people will be widows and people will be orphans and the villages will be destroyed." And I think sometimes it's easy to use God as a cudgel. God is on our side, and so, off with our enemies, up with us. But, I think true prayer probably is far more contemplative and, should get us to reflect not only on our, you think about the Lord's Prayer, it's, thy will be done. I mentioned in the preface, I sometimes say thy will be done, or if it's your will, as sort of a hedge, just in case God doesn't answer, the way I want him to. I've sort of covered myself, but we need to actually do that more authentically, that we are praying to align ourselves with, with the divine, and his will is more important than our wants are.
Well, okay, 30 seconds left. Is that that's a great takeaway. Is that one of your primary takeaways? Did it change how you prayed in some way?
I'm better at writing about prayer than I am at praying. It's one of the embarrassing things about writing the book. But I think it has made me more cognizant of, I think most of us, our prayers are almost all petitionary. And they probably ought to be more confessional. They probably ought to be more reflective. They probably ought to be more, your kingdom rather than our wishes.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Dr. John Vile, political science professor at MTSU. Always great to have you on.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks to everyone for watching Issues of Faith. Have a great day, everybody.